where I was born, in Marcy, New York, March the 29th, 1926. It was cold, snowing, so I heard about the time I was born. I was the ninth of 12 children, of 16 children, but 12 living children. My mother had 8 girls and 8 boys. Well, he came over when he was 18. His sister had already lived here, my Aunt Nell, in Remsen, New York. She'd been over with her first husband. And she sent him the money to come over when he was 18. So he said it took 13 days on the ship Carmania. He got out of Liverpool. And he came over. He said it took 13 days. He was one sick little boy when he got here. And he said he had a few coins in his pocket when his sister met him. But he went and lived with her in Remsen, New York for a while. And then he started wandering the country, and he ended up being a cowboy in Nebraska, herding cattle, taking them to market. He had cousins that lived in Wisconsin. So he went to visit his cousins in Wisconsin. Well, that's where my mother was born. When my mother was, I think she was 11, her father and mother divorced and put the 4 youngest kids in a children's home. And I think my mother's mother went crazy or something. She left them and left all the kids anyhow and put them in the orphans' home or children's home. And then they were dressed up, and people from around town that needed help would come and look them over and take them to their place to work for them. When they were 18, they got $50 for all the years of work that they put in. But they sent her to work for this Pugh family. Well, the Pugh family became her, just like her own parents, because we called the Pughs, they were Nine and Tide. Nine is grandmother and Tide is grandfather in Welsh. So we always called them Nine and Tide Pugh. But that's who she worked for. And my father, they were some kind of relatives of my father, and he stopped to visit him, and that's how he met my mother. So I don't. She was a nurse in the soldiers' home, working in the soldiers' home at that time. And they must have went together for a while, because he'd bought her gold bracelet, he bought her an opal ring, and she still had them when she'd bring them out and show us to kids, and a little watch that she wore, on a lapel watch that she wore, a gold watch, a little bitty one. Yeah. And she'd bring those out and show them to us. Yeah. My father was away, he worked on the Erie Canal when they were building the Erie Canal, putting the locks and stuff in, and they stopped using horses on each side of the canal at that time, and were putting making it motorized. And he was working building that. And he would come home on weekends. He stayed in Rome during the week, and he had friends on the police force, and they'd let him sleep in the jail during the week. But he said the only thing wrong with that was the bed bugs. The jail was full of bed bugs. Anyhow, he'd come home, and of course he got paid before he come home, and he would bring food and stuff with him. And I remember him coming in this one time with a whole big stalk of bananas, just all the bananas on the whole big stalk. Yeah, and that was the thrill. My father hurt his back when he was working, and he was paralyzed for several years. And he was in the hospital, and he had him in the morgue once, but he couldn't till he blinked his eyes. And so they couldn't help him at the hospital, so my mother took him home. And she make him move his legs and arms, make him creep on the floor. And in the summertime, we would go down to the creek, and she'd take all our washing down there, wash clothes, put a big boiler up and get the water boiling, and wash the clothes, boil the clothes, and then put them in the river to rinse them and dry them. And she used to put him in the water and make him move his legs and arms. And after that, when he came out of it, several years after that, you'd never know anything had ever happened to him. He was just perfect. So she brought him back. But if he hadn't have been sick that 5 years, there'd have been 5 more kids, I think, in the family. That's what I tell everybody anyhow. Well, we had a huge dining room table. Kitchen table. It was huge because all 14 of us sat around it. And when each new baby came, the youngest one and the next one sat on each side of my father, and the other two at the other end of the table sat on each side of my mother. But anyhow, we would get there, and we had to behave ourselves, and we couldn't all rattle on and talk when we were sitting at the table. And one of the kids would sneak out a fart, and we'd start giggling and stuff, and my father would make us get up and go out and run around the house 3 times before he let us back in. But we'd be sitting there giggling and sniffing, and somebody would fart. When I was little and we'd lived upstairs at night, I was afraid to get up and go out, run down to the toilet. In Welsh, toilet is a tibach. We called it tibach. And I was afraid to get out and run down to the tibach, so I'd open the window and pee out the window. And of course, my mother saw the brown streaks down there, and she said, "Who's been peeing out the window?" And I said, "Me, I have." Didn't do it again after that. Mm-mm. Well, my first school was in Fish Creek School. It was a one-room schoolhouse, and we had a round pot-bellied heating stove that they had to chop wood for, and they had all the wooden desk. And I remember we had ink wells in our desk and little ink pens that we dipped in. And our teacher was Bessie Greggins. She taught all 8 grades. But when I started school, I started in 2nd grade because Mary and Jack made me learn. I knew how to read, and I knew my ABCs, and I knew how to count and to spell and all that. So I started school in 2nd grade at Fish Creek. And I still had the same friends that I made there till just a few years ago when Janie Pratt died. And Frankie Nemo, I went to school with him and Janie Pratt. And Frankie Nemo married my best friend in Lee Center after we'd moved to Lee Center, and he came to Lee Center and he married Cora Beckley, who was my best friend there. And Janie and I, we kept in touch all these years, and about 20 years ago when I was back in Lee Center, I stopped to visit her. And old Lizzie Lauer was living with her. Well, Lizzie Lauer was the lady from when Tabor lived across the street from us when I was real little. And I guess I was 2 or 3, and she'd call me over there and ask me what was going on at our house because she was kind of nosy. And I'd like to go over there on rainy days because she was ironing. She'd wash and iron. And one day she was hanging up her curtains, and she was every time she'd get the curtain rod up, it would fall down on the other end. And she said, "Shit, S-H-I-T, shit." She'd say it over and over again. I went home and I said, "Ma, I can spell." Lily taught me how to spell. Ma said, "What can you say?" And I said, "Shit, S-H-I-T, shit." My mother swatted me across the mouth and made me stand behind the kitchen stove till she told me I could move. So that was one of the memories. But she was living with Janie Pratt when I went to Lee Center to visit Janie that day. Now that's funny, isn't it? And you only had 2 dresses. One was for school, and as soon as you got home, you took that dress off and put your house dress on. 2 dresses is all we had. We went barefoot when I was little. I don't think I wore shoes till I moved to Lee Center. Us kids all went barefoot. And at school, we had a pan of water by the door. We could wash our feet when we went in. If you see pictures, I have pictures of us at grade school in Fish Creek with most of us kids in bare feet. Yeah. Me and Sonny and Janie and Frankie and Esther Nemo and all that. And to think that they stayed in my life all the years. Oh, there was an old guy that lived up the road from us. And I used to like to go visit him. We lived on dirt roads, and what was his name? Mr. Rude. Yep. And they lived in a just a house with shingles on the outside, old white shingles. They had a nice yard, and I'd go in there. I don't know, he must have been crippled, or I don't know what he had, but he was always sitting in a chair with a blanket around him. And they had beans. They were great big beans. I'd never seen beans like that before. And I'd go in and go to his chair, and I'd say, "What you doing, Mr. Rude?" He'd say, "I'm stringing fart skins." I'd say, "Stringing?" He would, I think it was therapy. He'd slip I think he soaked them, and he slipped the skins off these big beans and sew them together with needle and thread. And that must have been therapy for him. But I used to like to go and watch Mr. Rude string his fart skins. I remember we used to, on Decoration Day, we lived out in Lee Center, and we would walk the 8 miles to Taberg on the dusty road, dirt roads, to march in the parade there and to put flags on the veterans' graves, because we got an ice cream cone at the end of it. And we walked all that way and back for the ice cream cone. Yeah. And my mother, when she came back from Rome one time, she brought us each bonnets, hats, and mine was purple with pink and green ribbon on it, and I forget what Mary's was like, but we hated the damn things. And my mother said, "Well, you don't go unless you wear those hats to keep the sun off you." So we wore our hats till we got halfway down about a mile down the road. We threw them in the bushes. Went on. Well, my mother went down the road after she knew what we were going to do, and when we got back home again, she had the hats on the kitchen table. She got it.
Tell me about what you used to look at in the window.
In what window?
At home.
When?
When you were little.
Look at in the window?
It was like a mirror.
Huh?
It was like a mirror.
Oh, you remember my butt?
So it started from the beginning of that.
We had windows. That's when we lived across from Lizzie Lauer, that went all the way down. There were long, narrow windows and a cement slab in front of it. And I would get up and pull my pants down and look at my butt. I thought that was the cutest thing, until my mother caught me and gave me a whipping for it. You don't do that anymore. But I thought it was pretty neat. Snow was as high as the roof of the house, the blizzards we had. Of course, everything wasn't built up. We didn't have the cities and the things built up like they have now, where you don't get snow like you used to get. We get 50 below zero weather in the wintertime. And you could look across and you just see the tops of houses across the fields. I think I have pictures of it in one of my books. And my father would have to make a tunnel from our back door to the barn to get out and milk the cows in the morning. And we kids had to walk to school through the snowdrifts. Well, they were belly high to us, but then we were little kids. You know, we tell somebody and they say, "Oh, you couldn't have had snow up to your bellies," and everything. Well, we were little kids, and it was up to our bellies when we walked to school. Did you ever think of that? Yeah. What we got at Christmas time? All we got was an orange and some peanut brittle. We'd hang our stockings up, and my mother'd make the peanut brittle. Of course, Santa brought them. And we'd be so thrilled. We never even thought about presents or stuff. So thrilled to think that Santa Claus had come. Yeah, I can remember me and Eddie and Mary going getting our stinking old dirty stockings that we hung. We'd take them off when we'd go to bed. We'd take them up and hang them up on the nail on the wall. Of course, we wore them for a couple of weeks. And Esther was born on December 22nd, and I remember that day so well because we got up on the 23rd, came downstairs, Eddie and I, and my mother said, "Would you like to have a doll for Christmas?" And I said, "No, I don't want any doll for Christmas. I want tables and chairs and dishes for Christmas." She said, "Well, I got a doll for you." And she pulled the blanket back and showed us the baby because she'd had it at home. My sister Maggie helped, and a neighbor lady helped her birth with Esther. And I wasn't thrilled about the baby. I was just thrilled to think that the stork had actually been in our house. Yeah, I could just picture the stork bringing that baby. It was just before Christmas. It was right after Esther was born. And my mother had gone to school with the kids. They had to go and practice because they put on a Christmas play. Did that in a one-room school, and everybody that lived around came to see their Christmas play on Christmas Eve. That's when we had it. And one night, I woke up. Eddie and I were upstairs. We had to go to bed. I woke up, I heard sirens, and I looked out, and there was a fire engine in our yard, and I looked, and our barn was on fire. And they couldn't get enough water from our well for pumping. And somebody said, I can pee a bigger stream than that. I heard them saying that. And then they come and got Eddie and I out of our beds and made us go across the street to Lizzie Lauer's place because our house caught on fire. The roof of the house caught on fire. And I went over to Lizzie's, but I ran back home because that first time I'd had some good shoes, and I had to get my little shoes out from underneath the bed because I didn't want them to burn up. I took them over to Lizzie's. But we stayed over to Lizzie Lauer's that night, all of us. But my father and the boys, they had tapped trees and got the sap out of the maple trees to make maple syrup. And they had several cans of that on the back porch. And the firemen come in the house and took our blankets off our beds. They thought they were milk cans full of water, and they doused them in that sap and put that on the house and made it burn worse. But they did. And then one of the kids ran to the school and hollered, the whole place is on fire. And my mother and Buck and the older kids were there, and I think she said she fell and she rolled running. She's about 2 miles, 2.5 miles from home that they had to run to get home for that. And then I remember the next morning, Henry Suter was the one that lived next to Lizzie Lauer, and they made pancakes and bacon and coffee for breakfast. First time I'd ever had pancakes. And I ate so many that my belly hurt and I had to roll on the floor. I just stuffed myself with them. Never had pancakes before.
Which one?
And my folks were buying a house and all the buildings and stuff outside of Rome. My father was working. They had money in the bank. Everything was good. And they were buying this house. And then they had this big depression, and one day all the banks closed. You lost every penny you had in the bank, and then they foreclosed on the house. And I remember the people coming to our house and making us move. I was just real little, but I can remember them. And my mother and father and all of us kids, I think there was 10 of us. Eddie was the baby. There was 10 of us then. Out on the road with only the things you could carry is all you could take, and the stove and the beds. And we were just standing out there, and some old farmer around there that knew my father come along, picked us all up, and took us to his place. And we lived up in the attic of his home. And my mother helped her with cooking and stuff, and my father worked on the farm for him to live there till we could find a place to live. But of course we never had any money or anything after that, so we lived on welfare. And we lived wherever welfare put, and they were some of the worst shacks. You don't know what shack living is till you was in there. No electricity, no running water. The walls were so thin, you had frost inside the window in the wintertime, that you had to scrape the frost from the inside to see outside. It was so cold in that house. All we had was the kitchen stove for heat. Yeah, that was... And never anything to eat. I think we lived on oatmeal and beans. Yeah. That was... And then I don't remember... I think that's when we moved across from Lizzie Lauer. We were sent to that old house. That was another old house with... half the plaster gone off the rooms and peeling wallpaper and wood floors that you'd walk across and get slivers in your feet. They weren't nice. Nothing was nice. And of course, Eddie and I didn't pay much attention to that because we were too little for it to bother us, but it did the older ones. Then we moved from there. The next place we moved was just about 2 miles up the road, farther, where we had a big house with a wraparound porch. It was old and was nicer inside than the place we moved from, but it wasn't very nice either, but it had a big wraparound front porch. I remember that. It was right across from Janie Pratt, who became my lifelong friend after that. Janie and Sonny. When we moved to Lee Center, when we first moved there, the teachers, it was Thanksgiving, and the teacher wanted everybody to bring something for a basket for the poorest people in town. And we all felt so good, you know. So I had 2 cans of canned milk. I don't know what the rest of the family kids brought. But anyhow, we did have a big basket at Thanksgiving time. And we're sitting home, and here comes his car puttering into the yard. And we were the ones that got the basket. And it was Elmer Levy from the local grocery store that bring it. He went to school with me. He was 17 then, 16 or 17. But it was Elmer Levy come driving in his father's car with a basket of everything for Thanksgiving. Of course, my mother was happy, but I was embarrassed to death to think that we were the poorest ones in town. I didn't think we were.
Come here.
We lived in Lee Center for several years till Bill Dust had his farm for sale, and he had a price that my father could buy it from. I think $400, 104 acres, with all the buildings on. Yeah, and I remember them plowing all the fields, and they had a couple fields of potatoes, acres, and corn and wheat. And I remember them out. They started out with a horse and plow, walking behind it. Can you imagine doing all those acres of just steady walking back and forth to plow that up? Then they had to disc it before they could plant anything. And then, of course, the kids came in handy when we'd get out and hoe and pull weeds and pick potato bugs, stuff like that, which we had to do. Yeah. And then my father started getting a dairy. He had, I think, 21 cows. He started out with just a couple. And so then he got a milker in the barn, where all day, instead of milking the cows, they just went and hooked these things to the cows, and did all the milking and went into this big machine. And then he had to change the house. We had an outhouse from the house. Couldn't have that anymore if you were putting... if you wanted to have a dairy farm and sell your milk. So he had to get rid of that and put an inside bathroom in. And they had to get rid of the old well, and they had to go down to the creek in the field and pump water from that up to the house. So everything was changed. That was the first time. That was after I was married that he put the bathroom in, because I wasn't living home anymore. But they finally had a bathroom in the house. Didn't have to go out. Yeah. And then I used to do housework for Mrs. Lemon. I think I was 9, 10 years old, 12 years old. For several years we used to go down and do housework. Like she had a hand bissel sweeper and do the dishes. And in fact, I stayed with her in the wintertime and helped her. And then I used to pick beans when we were 8 years old. All of us kids had to go out and pick beans. And the rows, I think they were a mile long, out in the hot sun, and it got a penny a pound. It took me all day long to make $1. But then $1 would buy 2 loaves of bread. It would buy butter, milk. You could buy a lot with $1 in those days, and with a whole bunch of kids working out in the fields, that helped with the food bill. I used to like to go to the dances when I was a teenager. Mickey and her husband Wonder would take me with them. A place called Crowfoot's, and they had barn dances, and you'd go in there and they had big bales of straw that you sat on, bales of hay that you sat on, and everybody from miles around came there on Saturday night to dance. We'd do the polka and the square dances. They had an old band from around the area playing, and it was good. All had music and do-si-do and Whirl Your Partner, and all the farmers and from around went out on Saturday night, and that's where we usually ended up, was Crowfoot's dancing. Then at Delta Lake, Delta used to be a village, and they wanted to bring Black Lake from up near Boonville, New York, into Erie Canal so that they could put locks in there. So they were put that in. So they flooded the town of Delta, and that's where Delta Lake is. But there's a whole village underneath, a beautiful village in there. But the people that moved from there, they moved to Lee Center and West Branch and Lee and all around us. And some of them, well, they had a big canning factory, and they took that all down, and they moved the canning factory to Lee Center. And that was our main job where people worked in the summertime. First, they started canning pumpkin and beans and peas, and then they started into other things. But my brother Buck, I got a job snipping beans when I was, I think I was about 14 or 15. But I talked too much, and I didn't last very long. I got fired. But my brother Buck worked down there, and he was the one, when they put them in the cans, they cooked all this stuff in great big things, and they put it in the cans, and they put the lids on. And my brother Buck was the one that he had his soldering thing, and he soldered the little hole that was left in the top of the can with lead. All the food was laced with lead when they got it. And they made their labels for the cans and everything. And I have books with pictures of the labels that were put in them. But to think that they put lead was what they sealed the cans with. But that was something where people would bring their stuff in by the wagon loads, and they would can them for them. They also sold it in stores, canning stuff. Yeah. At home, when my father would, it would be threshing time and time when they would cut the corn stalks down and make ensilage for the silo. We had a great big tall silo. I think it was about 8 or 9 doors up. You had to go up to get in the silo, and they would chop through the corn stalks up and blow them into the silo for ensilage for the cows in the wintertime. And us little kids had to get in there and tromp it around. Tromp it down to keep it tromped down. When it got up to 6th or 7th door, before you finally could get out and come down the little ladder. I was one of the best ensilage choppers in Lee Center. That was fun. I liked to do that. And we liked to get in the hay mow after they'd put fresh hay in the hay mow and jump off the rafters down into the hay. Yeah. When I was 15, I graduated from high school, and my first job was at the Mohican Market in Rome, New York. And just as you went in the door was the big stall that I was in with fruit and vegetables packed around on the outside, and I weighed and sold fruit and vegetables. But it was a good-sized store. It's still in Rome, and people still remember it. Put pictures on now on Facebook to see it, and it still looks like the same. It was right next to the old movie. We had a little church in Lee Center. It was the Protestant church that us kids, my mother and father didn't go to church, but they were strict. You said you thank God with each meal that you ate, whether you had food or not, you still thank God. But we'd walk down, it was about 2 miles. We'd walk to church on Sunday. I had 2 pennies for church, one for me and one for God. And after church was over, I'd stop in Felshaw's drugstore, and I would get 2 candies. It was usually 2 of the, what are these round barrels? Sassafras barrels. Yeah, you get 2 of them for a penny. We also had spelling bees at the church. Good spell. I thought I was the best spelling bee around and I was going to win, but I lost on, what was that part? Cistern, yeah. Oh, I got up there. I was going to beat everybody at that spelling bee because I outspelled them all. And they all sat down. There was me and another one left. I don't remember who it was. And I said, cistern, Sistern. And then I said cistern. You know, if I didn't say cistern after that and waited a while, and I could have spelled it right, but I just smart aleck and I said cistern. Boing! I didn't win it. Oh, and my brother Tom, that's when the boys in town. Tom and Grat Lemon and Chet Sussex, they were the buggers in town. And they went and stole Charlie Lloyd's wagon. They took it up on Main Street in Lee Center. They climbed on top of the church. They took the wagon all apart, took it up on top of the church and put it together again. So when anybody got up the next morning, they'd go down, there was a wagon fully assembled on top of the church, Protestant church. And us kids used to go out and soap the windows at home or something. My mother didn't mind because she knew us kids were going to wash the windows the next day. But we had to use newspaper and kerosene, what we washed the windows with. That was good. We shined them up real good. They got the toilet, the outhouse from behind the school. We still just had outside toilets in the school. And took them in town and put one in front of Felchow's store. Then we had an old Polish lady when we lived at Fish Creek that lived across the road and down a ways from us. And the boys used to go down to her place and tip her toilet over, outside toilet. And this Halloween, she got there ahead of the boys and had already moved it back. So when they fell in the poop. Yeah, all the teenage boys were such hotshots. You know what they look like, covered in shit. When we got to Lee Center, that had 3 different classrooms for school I was in that didn't have one room. It was 3 different rooms. And I started in the second room downstairs in 6th grade. And then when I went up to 8th grade, and I graduated from that when I was 12 years old. And I was the, I forget what it was, class something. I had predictor. I had to tell what all the kids were going to do. Kids were buggers in our school, in Lee Center School. We were upstairs. And the boys were 16, 17 years old, all smart alecks. And after I got to go upstairs into the 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade, we'd be saying the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning, and one of the boys had been in the back room where they kept all their supplies, and we had a human, it looked like a human skeleton. It was all the bones and everything for our science class or whatever it was. He'd come waltzing out with that, make all the kids howl and laugh. And we'd go to school in the morning, and we had a big thing of water tank that we'd go get drinks of water. They'd have that full of pollywogs and frogs. And then they unscrew the teacher's seat, and she had a big wide rear end. And she would come, when she sat down, her chair would fall apart. She'd go flying across the room. And they would draw dirty pictures, and they would take their old boots and mittens and put them on strings and hang them down so the kids in the lower rooms could see them. And they'd get all those kids laughing, and they'd get in trouble. So that's what kind of buggers that I went to school with. Then when we went to high school in Rome, old High Payne, he had the bus that he drove and pick us all up and take us. Well, Darryl Murat and Clyde Core were the worst kids in the school, and they used to get him and grab him and hold him down in the seat, and they would drive the bus. So High Payne got them one time, and he kicked them off the back of the bus and made them walk home, and they had to tell their parents why they had to walk home. But that's the kind of devils. They were just devils that I went to school with. The used to be a janitor that would come and clean the rooms after school. They locked him downstairs, down in the basement. Didn't tell anybody that they'd locked him in down there. So my brother Jack found him and let him out. They were mad at Jack for letting him out. They were just in this bad boys. And they turned out to be, Clyde Core turned out to be a preacher and a veterinarian. Darrell got killed in the Second World War. He and Chet Sessick were the first two, and my brother Buck from Lee Center that got killed in the Second World War. Yep. Well, we were home in the war. Yeah, I don't remember just about the war coming, and pretty soon everything stopped, and the recruiters came around to all the villages, and all the young boys wanted to sign up because they could go overseas, go to different places, get away from the farm. And just about all the boys from Lee Center went into service. And the ones that couldn't, and Gene Weibel was one of them, they had to stay home and run the farm. And either the ones that had to run the farm or do stuff at home, the others were 4F. If they couldn't hear good or couldn't see good, they were called 4Fs and didn't go to service. But the towns were just stripped of young men. And when they would come home in their uniforms, oh my, were they handsome. You know, those young little farmer boys, they were really good looking. We used to have meetings for them, I forget what it was called, where they could dance with the girls. Usually their husbands were overseas or in the service, but they couldn't date them, but they could dance with them. And it was 10 cents a dance. The soldiers would come and they would, from other towns and stuff, and have snacks for them and soda pop and dance. And the dances were 10 cents a dance. There's a song about that, I think, about the dancing. I forget what they were called. I wrote it down. I'll remember it later on. And when I turned 16, I got a job up in the air base. It was the Air Command. It was the first one. I think there were only 4 in the world at that time, and this was built in Rome, New York, and it was Rome Army Air Force Depot. It was a depot, but it was a command at that time. And all the big 5-star generals from around the world would come to headquarters there. And I worked in the headquarters building upstairs, teaching the ditto and what's the other thing? Mimeograph and ditto. And then I was teaching it to anybody that come through. And I was only 16 at that time. It was my own office. I had my own office. That's when the base was built, when I was 16. Well, I was about 14 when they started building, but it's a huge, huge base, and I think there were only 4 commands in the world at that time, and that was one of the big commands, the Rome Army Air Base Command. And all the bigwigs from all over the world came there and met. 5-star generals, 4-star generals, and they when they come to headquarters, of course that's where they all came when they come up on the base. They would come to our room. We'd have to leave our door open and stand by the piece of equipment and stuff we were, and they'd come in and tell us hello and what a good job we were doing. Keep it up, kids. You're doing a good job. Yeah. So I probably met Ike Eisenhower and some that time, but I didn't know it at that time. Didn't know enough to me, they were just another uniform going through. You know, I didn't pay attention to it. So I was working there, and then downstairs in headquarters building is where they had the mail room, big mail room, and your grandpa had been in Fort Devens, Massachusetts. He was in the service, and he was sent to the Rome Air Depot to work in the mail department. He rode a motorcycle and delivered mail and had his backpack, sorted mail, and he always coming in to visit me. And the first time I saw him, that was my other half. I knew it. I wasn't old enough to date. My mother wouldn't let me date till I was 18. So I would loan him money to go on dates. And he said that he finally owed me so much money he had to marry me. But as soon as I turned 18, we started dating, and that was, I think, the 15th of June was our first date, and we were married on the 23rd of June. Now that's fast. He was a fast little bugger. We spent our honeymoon at his folks in Pennsylvania. I'd never met them before. That's how I met. Grandma came to our wedding, Grandma Sweeney. But see, we'd only known each other 2 weeks. I mean, dated 2 weeks. I'd known him for about a year, but 2 weeks we were married. I thought he was crazy. But it lasted 36 years. We never had a fight in all those years. And I continued working on the base then. And we lived in a apartment place that was rows and rows of pink buildings, and it was called Pink City. And the houses were tar paper, but the painted pink, and inside were cement floors, and we had coal burning stove in the kitchen, and they were all alike. And the bathroom, the shower was cement, and a toilet and a sink in there. And the living room had a couch in that could be made into a bed at night, and that was our bedroom, living room. So we lived there, and we had, the milkman would go by, and all we had to do was leave a card in the window, how many quarts of milk we had, and he would take it in and put it in the ice box, because we didn't have refrigerators at that time. And then the iceman would come through and bring chunks of ice. While you were at work, you never locked your doors, and put the ice in the ice box. And of course the darn thing would melt, and you'd have to empty the water. It would run all over the floor, and you'd have to empty the water on it if you forgot. We did there until, after I got pregnant with Pat, I got so sick I had to quit work, stay home. I took pregnancy leave, and Grandpa went overseas. He was sent overseas for 9 months. And of course I had to shuffle back home to live on the farm with my folks. Never got to go anyplace, never got to do anything. It was like being in jail. After I got a taste of high-stepping and all that stuff. All the high-stepping, going out dancing and dating and all that stuff. No, it wasn't nice. He was overseas 9 months. He was home.
Roxy, come here.
How did she get that again?
She's got a squeaky toy. Roxy, come here. Come here. Bring it here. Bring it here.
Did you shut it off? She won't give it to you.
Oh, sorry. I've only got about 30 seconds left.
Get it. Get the ball. Get the ball. I'm holding.
Call her up on your lap. Have Roxy make a camera.
Come on, Roxy. Come here, Roxy. Come on. Nope, she got to go where the ball goes.
Yeah.
Okay, now what?